Welcome on DC to Dhaka. I'm Nicolette DeVidar here from Washington, DC. The US election is heating up. Now, today's the last primary of the major early states to choose a Republican nominee before Super Tuesday. It's in South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state. She is the Republican candidate competing with Donald Trump. Now, in 2024, the US may really look towards a rematch of Trump versus Biden. However, not everything is the same. Now, the voter makeup has changed since last time, as have many of the circumstances that Americans face day to day: record inflation, migration, ongoing wars, geopolitical issues, etc., etc. Eligible Hispanic voters grew by 12% to now 36 million. Eligible Black voters grew by 7% to now 34 million. According to Pew Research, Black voters account now for 14% of all of the voters, and over half of them live in southern states, the biggest of them being Texas. Asian Americans are the fastest growing demographic of eligible voters. They grew by 15% since 2020. They're now 15 million. Now, we want to talk about the US election, primaries, what's at stake, how might these changes affect the outcome, and what's likely ahead. My guests are Srilekha Palle. She's vice chair of the GOP in Fairfax, Virginia. It's the big urban area next to Washington, D.C. And we also have Steve Miller. He's CEO of US-CLO, a U.S. Christian leadership organization, Christian-based human rights organization dedicated to achieving racial equality, but he's also the former chief of staff of Democrat Beto O'Rourke. Thanks so much for joining us in this discussion. I want to start right off, since this is heating up. Super Tuesday's coming up, South Carolina today. Srilekha, as a woman and also of Indian origin, I believe, what are you expecting?
So, Nicolette, thank you for having us on the show. Reverend Miller, thank you for being on the show with me as well. So what am I expecting? I mean, I expect that what the entire nation is actually have projected this to happen. I think President Trump will have a big show, and he's going to take over, and Nikki Haley will not be able to win in her home state, unfortunately. And I think I sincerely hope Nikki Haley will concede at this point and will let Republican presidential candidate focus on winning the general election, because at this point, President Biden hasn't been doing any favor to this country by continuing to be in his role. So we really would like to consolidate our party base and try to kind of get our independents and moderate Democrats into our policy base and win the general election. So I see a big showdown and President Trump winning the race at this point.
Watching from sort of a little bit from a distance in this whole development there. What's your take on that?
You know, what's going to happen is what has been expected and coordinated to happen. You know, President Trump is going to be, not President Trump, but former President Trump, President Biden are going to easily win their primaries. But almost that's the way that it's been expected and organized. I mean, there's very little competition these days. I mean, the Democratic Party, you know, did not coordinate very well with Robert F. Kennedy. The other candidates from the Republican Party, they're out before the voting even begins. I think for a democratic society, this is a undemocratic way of running an election. I think competition is always good. It brings out the best in us. If a person wants to compete, let them compete all the way into the end. But we have to figure out a way to allow people to actually truly compete. So the outcomes of these races today are going to be in sync with the outcome that has been preordained. So as a Democrat, as a person, as a voter, I am always unhappy with that.
Okay, you brought up actually a point that I wanted to ask you a little bit later, and this was about the primary. So bear with me on this one about the one-person race versus the other thing. But I do want to get back to that. But I want to stick a little bit more to the South Carolina and what's at stake. Now, Srilekha, you're from Navarre, Northern Virginia, which is a very urban area, right? When you look at former President Trump's sort of sweet spot, that is a lot in rural areas, and there are smaller communities also, versus Nikki Haley, for example, is expected in South Carolina, in her home state, only in 2 areas where she might be able to get some higher numbers, which are also heavily urban areas. So my question to you is this actually more an election between rural and urban, large against small. What is this all about?
So, Nicolette, if you asked me about 2 or 3 years back or in the previous election cycle, I would have said maybe you're right. It is about suburban voters and urban voters, and Nova is actually urban, semi-urban too. But I think at this point, the country is facing so many challenges, right? Sometimes I think the Republicans or the country should not be focused on whether it is urban issue or suburban issue, right? I say having a staggered economy right now, the entire public safety issues that we are having in these blue states, and having this intense migrant crisis is not an urban issue or suburban issues. So if you asked this question to me about 3 years back, I would have said something very different. But I think at this point, local issues have become state issues, state issues have become national issues. So I think all of us are very focused on bringing a president who can actually solve all of our issues and bring the country back into order.
Steve, question to you. Do you agree with this assessment? I would have thought that powers have shifted a little bit more towards local, but that sounded like it's more now going more towards the federal. What is your take on that?
I think issues now are more national and international, because at that level, the president is always dealing with national issues. He's always dealing with international issues and how they impact everybody, even on the local issues. Despite these issues being national and international, the campaign operatives don't look at it that way. The campaign operatives cater to people in a particular region. And I think the Republican Party does cater more to people in the rural area. In Texas, for example, Texas has been ruled and controlled and governed by Republicans since 1992, I believe, or 1996. I believe that's when Ann Richards was governor and when she was swept out of office by President George Bush. Now, in Texas, and I want to say this is probably true all over the country, in Texas, the Democrats run the table in the cities, in the urban areas. I mean, they really clean up, right? And they don't do well at all in the rural areas, right? The Republicans, on the other hand, are almost, but not quite, the exact opposite. In the urban areas, the Republicans get their fair share, all right? As opposed to in the rural areas, the Democrats don't even get their fair share. The Republicans get their fair share in the cities, and they run the tables in the rural areas. And because of that, they win. Republican candidates are heavily dependent upon rural areas, and they market to them and they cater to them. And as a result, they turn out to vote and they win these elections, right? But then at the same time, when you look at our electoral college, it's really unfair to be Democratic. I know it was voted on and ratified back in the day to be our way of government, but this constitutional principle is very undemocratic, and it gives unnecessary and disproportionate power to rural states and rural areas to control almost the whole entire country. The Republicans.
But Steve, one could also turn that around. One could also say that it's actually the other way around. It's that rural people usually get forgotten, although they produce on the land and feed, so to speak, a lot of the people. Whereas in cities, you have all the people, the more kids they have, the more migrants that come in, the better the voters, etc. One could also turn that around. Let's see what Srilekha says.
So,
Okay.
Nicolette, I think you make a good point, and I think Reverend is also trying to kind of saying that here in urban areas, Republicans get a fair share, whereas in rural areas, Democrats. And I think in this presidential elections, especially in 2024, when wages are not keeping up with the cost of essential goods and services, doesn't matter where we live. I mean, Biden is talking about economy, whereas regular Americans, whether we are living in rural or urban areas or suburban areas, we are talking about affordability. Not the Americans think about affordability, not economic indicators. I mean, home ownership has become an issue, whether you're living in rural or whether you're living in urban, right? So decent wage that is not able to keep with inflation, a college education, whether you're a rural kid or an urban kid or a suburban kid. I think those are the issues that will matter in 2024 with two wars going on that is affecting all of us. I think that's going to really those are the issues that voters will be focused on.
Now, I want to switch gear here for a second and go to South Carolina for one more time. Because when we talked about this, Haley is set to go after urban areas, Charleston and Richland, which make up about 16% of the vote, Trump likely in the rural areas. But those are also the evangelical strongholds. And I want to tap a little bit into what role faith plays. And I know for both of you, because I find this interesting, because this is a big question. And yet, so the Republicans argue, or actually the Democrats sort of sometimes condemn, actually a lot, condemn the faith base of the Republicans. And yet, Steve, you're a Democrat, you're Christian leadership. Talk about what role does faith play about African-American voters?
You know, faith plays a huge role in politics, not only in Republican circles, but also in Democratic circles. I think for African-American voters, faith is always at the top of their list in terms of how they're going to select a candidate. It's always at the top of the list. But I think the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, our political system gives us false choices, and it unnecessarily puts people into one party and another party. You know, it forces them to choose what party, even though they might have believe in issues that cover the gamut of the spectrum. So it allows you or makes you falsely choose. I think the reason why most African Americans, even though they are Christian, and that's always at the top of their list when they vote, the reason why they support the Democratic Party for the most part is their issue on human rights and civil rights. That's the sole reason why they support the Democratic Party. I think the Republican Party, in terms of religion, you know, I am a loving person. I think always at the center of religion is love. And when Republicans tend to talk about Christianity, just in my opinion, it comes from a place that's not love to me. It's love in this very narrow sense instead of love in this very open sense. I think Democrats come at it from a more open sense. And if we could talk and debate more between each other, I think we might be able to come to some kind of conclusion. But to answer your question, religion is always at the center. And African Americans, freedom and justice is a central part of what their religion teaches. And so since the Democratic Party has been on that side for many, many years, that's one of the primary reasons as to why they support Democratic candidates.
Srilekha, your reaction, your take on that?
Nicolette, faith is actually a big part of every religion, I say, not only Christians, but I think every religion. But since we are kind of focused on evangelicals and Christians, I can tell you that Republican Party, I mean, for as long as I've been part of the Republican Party, I have to slightly disagree with what Reverend Miller. There is a lot of love. In fact, I sit on the board with the National Religious Freedom with former Ambassador Sam Brownback. There is a lot of focus on policies, through not only in national policies, international policies that we're trying to work on, where Christians are trying to bring in that strength for religious freedom, empowering policies to build the coalitions for to ensure that everyone is protected under religious freedom. I think there is strength in unity, strength in ensuring that Judeo-Christian values are followed through, and so on and so forth. So with regards to African-American voters, I think the reason the Republican Party is having such a hard time penetrating, which I think will change with President Trump doing so much for African-American communities, and African-American communities actually recognizing and embracing that it's not that superficial talk that Democrat policies say they will do something, but they don't do. So look into the places such as Baltimore, Chicago, Detroit. I can go on and on and on. All the Democrat mayors that have been controlling those cities for decades, but really the cities are run down and really haven't improved their structure and so on and so forth. And I can give you one more structure example. One thing that has changed the dynamics in faith community that needs to be observed is during COVID, the tyranny that Democrat policies have put in to an extent to tell us that we can't even visit our faith places, I think have changed a lot of faith folks' understanding of how tyranny can really affect us as people, as Americans, real Americans. I think if you really understand that concept, you will never be able to vote for this big government Democrat policies. I think once you start suppressing me and my faith, then you are not going to be my party and you will not represent my faith.
All right, Steve, I give you a minute to answer here.
I mean, wow. I think this is one of the problems with politics. It takes religion and it weaponizes religion against people, adherents of people who share the same religion. I'll take you, for example, she says that she's been in meetings with people and there's a lot of love emanating from those on the Republican side and what they say. But when it comes down to what they do, I mean, there's a disconnect there.
Okay, hang on a second. When you say what they do, you're kind of stereotyping here. So I'm going to have to call you out.
When I say that, I'm saying
everyone who's in there is belonging to they. Isn't that very judgmental to
I'm
actually say they love and this is not? Who are you to judge what someone loves and what someone doesn't?
Well, let me tell you, when I'm saying they, I mean Republicans, right? We're talking about Republicans and difference between Republicans and Democrats. So when I'm saying they, I mean Republicans, okay?
So all Republicans do not love? Is that what you're saying, essentially?
No, you gotta let me get to the end. You gotta let me get to the end. All right. And I'm responding to what she said. Okay. Right. I'm responding directly to what she said. So when I'm saying they, I'm not talking about everybody in the world. I'm using a pronoun for Republicans, they, Republicans. It's a pronoun. So what I mean by this is, for example, Charlottesville, right? So we have the rhetoric of what Mrs. Srilekha was saying about Republicans, really loving. But when you look at Charlottesville, when you have people marching through the streets and saying openly, with no mask on, Jews would not replace us, and there's no condemnation, national condemnation coming from Republicans about that, that is very hateful language. That is very hateful speech. And coming from a group of people who say we are loving Christians and you're condoning that and not speaking on that, that is a contradiction, right? And people are very confused by that. That was not a loving act. It was a hateful act. It was a demonic act to say Jews would not replace us with torches. And then there's no widespread condemnation of it. As a matter of fact, some of them are good people. I don't understand that.
Is it loving to lock people up and say you can't go out because there's something that we don't know what it is, a virus? Is that love to tell other people how to live their life? I don't think so.
Well, in this country, you debate things, right? You debate things. And from what I know about religion and from what I know about how I think about religion, if there's a disease that is ravaging the world, that is killing people, right? It makes sense to me that we shouldn't gather at all. It wasn't saying that people couldn't gather for their religion. God prioritizes life, right? So in that situation, for us to come together, it would put life in danger. So no, Democrats were saying
science out there today that says otherwise.
Now this was early in the process before we knew the things that we know today. So early in the process, this was a very, very ravaging and deadly disease. So bringing people together.
So Reverend Miller,
let me finish. We didn't know. So we were bringing people together because we were afraid. We didn't know if this was going to kill people or not, cause this mass infection that was going to take a lot of people out. So as an abundance of caution, we were limiting everybody from being together. But you're right. This is a country. So we are allowed to debate that without calling people names or saying people are undemocratic and saying people are totalitarian and all those types of. I don't think those types of debates should come into the question. We should sit down at the table and debate the merits, not start calling names and start calling people undemocratic and totalitarian and things of that nature. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, Srilekha, quick answer, and then I want to shift gear because we got some more things to tackle.
Go ahead.
Reverend Miller, I mean, I would have understood a mass gathering. I'm a healthcare professional myself, by the way. I treated COVID patients left and right, never took a day off for 2.5 years during that time, taking care of patients. But I do want to comment that if they could ban the churches, why didn't they not ban the bars? Why didn't they not ban the sports arena? Why come down so hard on faith? They knew they were affecting certain sector of people, and I think that's unacceptable. And second point, with regards to loving, I went to all my elementary, high school education and undergrad back home in India. If it wasn't for Christian nuns, I would not have primary education. So I consider them as loving people. So I think the rhetoric that there are people that are hateful, obviously the Charlottesville incident is despicable. There is really no doubt about that.
But they're good. But they're good people, though.
I'm sorry?
They're good people, though.
Exactly, but we can't just generalize.
No, they're not good people. The people saying the people who are saying Jews will not replace us with their torches with no mask on.
I'm gonna
Those aren't good
have
people.
to cut in there because
President Trump said they're good people.
I think one could actually turn this argument around to a lot of other things too, like those who burned down the cities, who also would say they are good people. But when you're a business owner and your business has just been turned down, I wouldn't call those good people and loving people for the same reason. But I'm going to end this one here. We're going to move on to the next one.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about the South Carolina once again. Do we know today actually what both candidates, what differentiates Nikki Haley from Donald Trump, Srilekha?
I think the policies, Nicolette, I mean, if you think about it, on the superficial end of it, hey, it's nice to have a women of color in the highest governmental power. If that is all the case, then I would have voted for Kamala Harris. But I never, ever want to have my leader based on, I am not into identity politics. I always said there's a very good reason I have decided never to vote Democrat. I always vote based on policies, what is good for the country. And I think what President Trump has done for 4 years, no wars whatsoever, our economy being at peak. Again, coming from a very strong international background, I know geopolitics so very well, at least from the South Asian perspective. I think having a strong America First policies, but also having an understanding of what NATO can do for us, cannot do for us, what UN can do and cannot do for us. What Paris Accord can do and cannot do for us. I think it's super important. I think President Trump knows that and understands and acknowledges that, whereas Nikki Haley has worked under him, so she kind of understands that. But it is also important that you got to be a strong leader, not to come into the power of bigger influence and bigger donors. So I would go for President Trump, who has experience, who can strong stand and protect the country no matter what happens.
Steve, do you think African American voters in South Carolina, which is the South, do you think they understand the difference between those two? From where you're sitting and what you know of being involved with a lot of African Americans down there?
The difference between who?
Between Trump and Haley?
No, I don't think they're paying attention to them.
Okay.
At all.
Okay. So
they see them as the same.
Mm-hmm.
They're seen as the same. So they're not paying attention. They're paying attention to what's going on in Democratic circles.
So let's look ahead. What do you see as going forward? What are some of the key states or key developments we need to, or it's important to kind of look out for? What can we expect going forward? Srilekha, what's the next one after this one? So I heard you say you would expect Nikki Haley to concede today?
I mean, I would think it is in the best interest of the Republican Party. If she's really it feels like she isn't for the party, I think she should concede. But I think, Nicolette, if I have to say, out of Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, I would pay particular attention to Michigan. I'll tell you why. I know Reverend Miller is part of Democratic leadership. This may be a message that he can take. I mean, there is strong Arab Americans and Muslim Americans in Michigan that are very, very displeased pleased with what is going on and how President Biden has taken on Hamas and how he has handled the recent war there. I think there is a lot of displease there. So Michigan would be a state that would definitely go for President Trump this time around. And for very good reason. I think President Trump's policies are better for America. So that may be a state that I'm very confident would just swing easily towards President Trump.
Steve, what do you see ahead as kind of a key development or key state to look out for?
Well, South Carolina, in terms of Democrats, especially now, as opposed to 2020, they were so far down in the primary until sometimes their voice can be muted. But the Democrats this time decided to bring that state earlier into the process to give it more power, because the Democratic Party tends to be more diverse and African Americans have more of a voice within that policy. So they're trying to bring the power up front and closer to the beginning, so that power can resonate and be more forceful as you go further and further down the ticket. I want to touch on something that Mrs. Powell said a second ago, is that I think competition is always good. If there's a politician that wants to run, that wants to campaign for as long as they can, I think they should be allowed to. Competition brings the best out of people. I think competition is the forerunner of tyranny. You know what I'm saying? It's a forerunner that disrupts tyranny. So ideas going forth, competition springing forth, debates happening for as long as they can brings out the best in people. And the thing that really makes me believe that is when you go back to 2008, when President Obama and Hillary Clinton were running against each other. They ran against each other strong all the way up until June. There was spirited debate. Ideas were being discussed. And because of that competition, it really rallied Democrats. And at the end of that, it positioned them to go on to, it positioned them in such a way to where they were able to win the White House in 2008. And I think that's true because of the competition and how it mobilized and galvanized people in general.
So the only comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
The only comment I have is I wish the entire Democratic circle had Reverend Miller's spirit. Competition is very good. So it's strange that they're running 81-year-old President Biden, who barely has mental acuity. They should have strong leaders by now in Democratic Party circles. That should be a competition to this man that can run this country move forward if they really want competition to survive. So I'm kind of surprised that the entire Democratic Party doesn't share the same nice spirit that Reverend Miller. I wish they had the same spirit of competition amongst that circles too.
Well, we have to be real careful when we talk about age. You know what I mean? We have to be real careful when we do that.
Yeah, I would agree. The age thing, I don't think it's so much an age thing, but it's really more about actually fitness and all sorts of other things. However, I do want to get back to
mental acuity is what I added. 81-year-old mental acuity is what I said.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily depend on age. I think that depends also on the person, right? So, Steve, I want to ask you about this too, because I know you were pretty disappointed with the Democratic Party in terms of only having the one candidate and basically suppress the competition, as you called it. Yeah. So how do you think, if you look at Kennedy, for example, as a third party, how do you think this is going to factor in? And how does it factor in, presumably, with African-American voters?
I like Kennedy. I think his uncle was one of the greatest presidents of all time. America loves the Kennedys. I mean, they are the royal family of America. And whenever you have a Kennedy running, he's always going to affect the race. Whenever there's a Kennedy on the ballot, they're always going to affect the race. I think it was a great mistake for them to not allow him to run and not be democratic. Sometimes I get very upset with this country. They offer us false choices. The way we elect people in this country in many races from the bottom all the way up to the top are not very democratic, right? But I think in the end, with them not allowing him to run and then him deciding to run as an independent is going to be the death knell of President Biden. I think it's going to take so many votes from him. African Americans love the Kennedys. They have a great spirit. They have a great history and tradition of being on the side of people who are oppressed or the people who are marginalized, and they have a tradition and history of that in their family. And I think because he's on that other ticket, that he's going to steal a lot of votes away from President Biden. And I think it's going to be very detrimental to his campaign. And it may just cause him to lose. It's a major blunder for him not to run in the primary ticket to build up his supporters. And then probably in the end, he would have lost. But at least he was collegiate enough and would form a relationship enough with with Mr. Kennedy to the point to where they could negotiate with each other, and then he would be able to carry his supporters into the general election. And because he didn't allow him to run, transferring to the independent ticket is going to be very, very, very detrimental to Biden's race. I believe that.
Do you think there's a chance that they are going to bring in a new candidate like everyone would expect in the last minute?
No, it's intriguing and for us to talk about these types of things as pundits and political lovers of political life. But no, we always do that type of stuff to get people interested in politics. But no, they'll never do that. No, they won't bring in another candidate.
All right, Srilekha, last question to you. What do you think? You think what's gonna happen? Are we gonna have a rematch of the same people?
I am actually quite positive that they will have no choice but bring in. As a healthcare professional, I'm not here to sit and diagnose by any means, but we had a congressional race here in Virginia 10, and I attended a debate. And while the debate was going on itself, I was telling my peeps that sat next to me saying that young lady, without going into names and not giving up our congressional, I was telling that that particular congressman or woman has some medical diagnosis going on, and she or he would drop out, and that eventually happened. So I'm not here to sit and diagnose, but there is really no way with that kind of mental acuity, any person without going into age, because any age person can have mental acuity issue, can survive another 4 years. So I am pretty positive Democrat Party has second plan. They should. If they don't, and they will bring out another candidate. I'm very positive, and I'm not one of those conspiracy theorists by any means, but I think that is a pragmatic thing to do. And if I was part of their political strategist, I would be very sharp, and I would be definitely thinking that through.
Very interesting debate. Thank you so much for both of you for coming on. I did get off everyone almost on time, so you have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you so much for watching. We see you next time.